Put me on a team by myself, I'll fuck everybody up.
There's this little corner of cryptocurrency that is the lightest considered, and I absolutely love it because it gives me a break from all of the seriousness and all of the nastiness that goes on often. And so
All by
this
myself.
being Crypto Euclid and his gang of merry friends, and yeah, I did end up in that thread, and it was just a meme factory for like 2 hours, and you know, so sometimes weird things get my attention, right?
Yeah, and now you're going to come and be a advisor on my ICO, right?
Absolutely, yeah, of course. Are you monetizing hairy asses, or was that a side job?
I'm putting hairy asses on the blockchain.
Yeah, well, that's really where they belong.
So it's funny actually. I've
Weird.
obviously wanted to interview you ever since I started, and then once
Andreas
you agreed
Antonopoulos.
and I heard from you, then I was like,
It's one of the
shit, I don't know what I'm going to talk to you
clearest
about because
spokesmen for
everybody
blockchain.
else I interview is usually in a niche, right? They're like when I interviewed Zuko, it was like short legacy. But with you, there's so much, and I'm like everybody else, like interviews every day, scientific, and I'm like, how do you know so much? Yeah, I know it's fine. I mean, I've learned so much from it, but like, how do you know so much stuff?
About crypto or
Everything. Just like everything. You seem to know like
Oh,
exactly how
dumbass.
the
Just
world
study.
works,
That's all you need
how
to do.
money works, how the
You can
economy
figure out
works.
anything.
Like, I don't want an origin story, but what are all these influences that got you to here?
well, I do have a weird path. Then again, everybody does. I've been tremendously lucky in my life and have found myself following a very, very bizarre path to where I am today. Started off as a middle class kid in Greece during a dictatorship, currency crisis environment. That certainly influenced me a lot. Um, I think probably one of the biggest influences in my learning and my desire for knowledge have been my parents, who are both very much all about education, but especially my mother, who was a huge book reader. And so I grew up in a house, and this is probably the biggest influence I've had. I grew up in a house where every single room had wall to wall, ceiling to floor bookcases that were filled with books. Probably a fire hazard, but a learning environment, one in which, and not just serious books, the whole range, from the silly to the trashy to the very serious to the classics. Uh, and it was an environment in which everyone was reading all the time, and reading was seen as an important activity. So even though when I was young I didn't read as much, once I was an adult, I started reading voraciously, and it's only increased. So I read 2 to 3 books a week, and I dedicate a lot
Oh,
of
I'm by
time to
myself.
reading across the
Cool.
whole range, including from the
I'm about
trashy
to,
to the
I'm
serious,
about to tear this game
technical,
up. I like playing by
non-technical
myself
fiction,
against teams.
non-fiction,
So
biography,
there's
history,
another one
geography,
around here. Damn, I
business,
should have just let
but
you
also
crawl.
trashy sci-fi and ridiculous books. And I just love reading. It's the reason I
Oh, with my
love
shotgun.
learning about new subjects. It's also the reason that I became an author, because I love
Damn.
words. It's the
I
reason
don't want this
I
shit.
think I do a good job as a public speaker. Words are just such an important part of my life.
What are you
Okay,
reading right
there's
now?
one of you.
What am I
one
reading? Well,
close
so
by.
generally, I'm usually reading 2 or 3 books simultaneously, so I'll flip from one to another. And I'd have to pull up my Kindle to tell you specifically. So I'm reading a book called The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker, which is about how much of our behavior in life is driven by an underlying fear of death and facing our mortality. It's part of a series of books I'm reading now about aging and mortality. In order to understand my own journey in that, I'm reading a book called Boundaries, which is about how to manage expectations and boundaries in interpersonal relationships. I'm reading The
He's
Killer
healing.
Collective by Barry Eggers, which is a spy thriller. I'm reading Charles Stross' The Labyrinth Index, which is part of his Atrocity Archives Magic and Zombies book has computational, as higher order computational math. And across the range, right? So if I want to learn something, probably the first thing I do is buy 2 or 3 books. I want to be better at project management. I'll buy 2 or 3 books. I want to learn more about statistics. I'll buy 2 or 3 books. I'm trying to develop my comedy training.
Cautious these surroundings of buildings.
So that's my go-to.
Right, okay. Right, so give me one book that I will never have read that I should read. I've got to go and buy now. I've got to get a flight to New York on Sunday. So give me a book to read.
You know, I think that's a very, very personal question, and it depends on what level of reading you do and what you enjoy. But I would say, bar anything else, find something that you think will be fun. Reading shouldn't be about a goal. It should be about the
Oh,
process,
damn.
right? It shouldn't be about
Lucky I
getting
gave away
somewhere. It should be
that
about
rocket launch. I
the
blew
time you
y'all up.
spend in the book and enjoying that time. And the more you enjoy the stuff you're reading, the more you read, and then the more you'll enjoy the new things you read. So really, as a personal piece of advice, find a book that you think you're going to really enjoy and use that to enhance your reading.
You know, I don't need to read books though. I enjoy film. I'm a film, so I get on a plane, I want to watch 2 or 3 films.
That's nothing wrong with that. You know, I don't want to be a book snob here. You know, for every person has their own learning mode, right? Some people are very busy. Language happens to work for me. That doesn't mean it's for everyone.
Well, we should really talk about the Bitcoin really, because, you know, this is why we're here.
Why not? Sure.
Why not? So look, firstly, what are the unsolvable problems in an open, decentralized, public, transparent, neutral, censorship-resistant, global, trustless network platform? I saw that earlier, but I just pointed it out.
The unsolvable problems.
I'm only joking.
Well, I can tell you what the unsolvable problems.
Go on then, shoot.
Human nature. And there's this assumption that I see floating around the world, especially around technologists, that you can solve deep-seated social problems and really societal problems, which are squarely in the area of sociology and are deeply rooted in human behavior and human emotions and human biology, really. And you can solve these with technology. You can't change humanity with technology. Well, you can, but you can't change the deeply rooted human behavior characteristics of some of them. And it's naive to think you can. So bad behavior will always exist. You're not going to eradicate that. Irrational behavior will always exist. Emotional behavior will always exist. And you can't change that. You can't turn people into cold, rational actors just because you introduce a different form of money or introduce a new organizational model.
Well, that made me think of something, because I was watching one of your presentations, and we're talking about cartels, the banking cartels, and how they get away with so much. And I was like thinking, is this one sinister, organized system, or is it just the sum of a bunch of bad people making bad decisions?
It's not even the sum of bad people making bad decisions. It's the sum of good people and bad people. Very few bad people, mostly good people, stuck in organizational structures and institutions that collectively and in aggregate guide towards decisions that are not particularly bad necessarily, but are amoral. They have no moral compass. They towards good or bad, they simply follow a different set of guidelines, mostly profit. And because the distance between the decision maker and those affected by those decisions is greater and greater in these hierarchies, and because of the dilution of responsibility, where each person contributes a tiny part and they don't see the big picture, you end up with organizations that act in ways that go against good outcomes in society. And it's not about bad people. If it was, it would be easier to solve. It's about the architecture of the system that leads to good people making tiny decisions that in aggregate improve the institution become very, very negative for society. And that's a problem that's much harder to solve.
So I guess there's a lot of temptation that comes into that as well.
But it's not, well, that may be the case for some of the bad actors, the immoral actors, the narcissists, the people who are sociopaths and lack empathy and right at the top of these organizations. But again, that's a systemic issue. It's not about personal decisions. The average banker, the average person who works in a bank, even though tiny place, is a perfectly nice person who on a day-to-day basis making choices for the betterment of humanity, but mostly to pay their mortgage and raise their kids and create a good environment for their family. It's the system they work in that produces bad outcomes. So it's very important to distinguish between the two, because if you take this Manichean approach of good versus evil, it clouds judgment. There are no easy answers, and if you take a simplistic black and white view of the world where there are good people doing good things and there are bad people doing bad things, well, that would be a hell of a lot easier to fix. You just find the bad people. But that's not the case. The problem with the world, I think, is when good people make bad choices or
tripping. I should have kept moving.
To bad outcomes without wanting to.
Damn, I should have kept moving.
Or where they can be manipulated and corrupted by bad people who gain power. So
Yeah, I
those are
wasn't
much
good.
more complex problems to solve. They don't.
Damn, I should have kept moving. I could have killed both of them.
To understand or analyze.
Damn,
And,
I fucked up.
and that's why it's satisfying and also easier to just go for a black and white view of the world.
Damn, I could have crushed them. I beat
Things
joints
happen
like this
because bad
before
people do bad things
by
to
myself.
very, very rarely the case. There are such cases, of course. Pure malice does exist.
Oh, let's do that again.
There are
yo.
disturbed people who deliberately do things to hurt others, but they're such a vanishingly small percentage, and we can't account for most of the evil that happens in the world. Most of the evil happens in the world happens because good people are not aware of the impact of their actions and are not taking enough interest and personal responsibility to change those.
But what would you say, therefore, in this failed or failing system that doesn't work? What are the pillars of the architecture that cause the problems?
Well, the primary issue, and I look at this architecturally, is that of scaling. And, we've got to remember that banking institutions today were enormously liberalizing institutions for the vast majority of the 18th, 19th, and 20th century. Before the introduction of retail banking, was introduced in the 15th, 16th century, the only people who had access to banking were princes and kings. So you had to be a member of the Royal Aristocracy, not even lower than you had to be higher than the princes would write a check to the king, right? Drawn on the treasury. So these institutions, which were started by a merchant class in medieval Europe that was very, very strongly persecuted by the aristocracy for making banking available to the masses. and which in many cases had historical implications beyond that. These institutions freed up uh, billions of people, literally gave freedom to billions of people by empowering them to join in corporations, associations, to manage their money, to have free commerce, to be able to save, to have banking for the masses. At some point, however, the institutions themselves, because they're scaling in a hierarchical model, in the form of a pyramid structure, the industrial model of bureaucratic organization, where you have layers and layers and layers and layers, in order to scale an organization, that scale collapses at some point. At some point, the distance between decision makers at the top of the pyramid and the people affected by those decisions at the bottom becomes too great, the responsibility is too dilute, and the organization fails to make good decisions. So it's an architecture problem. And the way it's solved is by decentralized flat architectures that are enabled by software, where governance is
Going
done
to
on
where
a
the
network
party is at.
rather than through a bureaucracy.
Crush.
Bureaucracies are a great invention of the 18th century.
They're like a team. They're not
Banking's a
fully
great
together.
invention of the 16th
They're on
century.
their
Those
own.
inventions raised billions out of poverty, and they were
Grid.
great. And now they fail to scale. And now we need new institutions to survive
Come
the
on, man, hurry
21st
up and drop.
century without destroying our planet.
And Bitcoin one of those.
Going full year.
Bitcoin is absolutely one of those, and it is one of those because of its decentralized.
Oh wow, no
governance
weapon.
model.
Right, well look, we're 10 years in now. Where do you
Yeah, I
kind
heard
of
that,
see
right?
it? If you look at the
Next
last
year it'll
10
be
years
11.
and then try and picture forward, where do you kind of see us on
Third.
the journey of Bitcoin and how Bitcoin can change us?
Oh, I think we're making tremendous progress. The technology has proven to be enormously resilient, surprisingly.
my
many times
M16.
resilience.
No scope. No
It's
beam. No
being
nothing.
attacked, both from the outside and the inside, a number of times by different power structures and embedded interests, both within and without the space. And it's managed to repel these attacks and maintain the fundamental structure. It's very resistant to change, which is a huge benefit once we see these attacks happening. And it's also spawned, thousands of imitators, some of which are actually doing interesting things in the periphery that also benefit it. So, I think it's going pretty well, better than I expected.
So there's a question I asked a lot of my interviews, and I know you've answered it before, but the first time I heard it was actually asked to Adam Back, and I love the different responses I get. So before we go on, I just want to ask you, what is Bitcoin? Because this leads us onto a bunch of other things.
It depends the context which I'm answering that question and the audience I'm answering that question. I would say Bitcoin is the fifth evolution of
they in
money,
teammates.
in its most
They
abstract
chasing.
form, coupled to a new governance model that delivers the purest form of network governance we've ever seen.
And I'm guessing you believe, therefore, it can become.
They
I mean, I guess
chase
it already
it,
is a
they
global
chase it.
currency of sorts, but do you actually see a scenario where it becomes the primary currency within certain countries? Or all countries?
It's just like that
I don't
way.
know yet, and that depends on many other factors, many of which are externalities. It depends on what fiat does across the globe in the meantime.
Damn.
I don't think that's necessarily a very good goal, because in some cases, I think certain types of mainstreaming of this technology require compromises that I personally wouldn't make. And so I would rather see something that is a bit less mainstream and a bit more niche, but delivers the maximum amount of freedom and empowerment for the people who use it, and becomes a choice that is available and resistant to capture, than to see it become, endorsed by governments, endorsed by banks, mainstreamed to people who care less about privacy and monetary soundness and decentralization of power. So if the price of mainstream is compromising on those principles, I'll pass, on mainstream. It doesn't matter. I define success differently. I define success as maintaining its resilience and building even better privacy to deliver more power to individuals around the world to use it as a choice if they need it. And depending on how fiat goes, more and more people may end up needing it. So that's a whole other issue.
But therefore, you see it having a symbiotic relationship with fiat.
Absolutely. I think that there are many reasons why people choose to use currency, and not all of them are rational or based on sound monetary policies. People have irrational approaches, including being influenced by nationalism, by tribalism, by various other instincts that make them or guide them to making a choice that is not perhaps in their best interest, but satisfies other emotional needs, belonging, in-group thinking, things like that. And if you account for these externalities and you also account for the friction in changing systems that already exist, that means we're likely to have an environment in which all of these systems coexist for quite a while, if not permanently, for the same reason that even if you have a dominant language that is very, very useful to the vast majority of the human population, that doesn't eradicate all the languages. Even if you have a dominant religion that seems to satisfy the spiritual needs of most people, that doesn't eradicate all of the others. In fact, if anything, they're increasing. And finally, in terms of currencies, even if Bitcoin has a dominant position in a power law distribution, it captures a very big percentage of the market. That doesn't eradicate all of the other things that might exist. I'm comfortable with these things coexisting. We're 25 years into the internet, but I can still find practices, including government offices. They serve a purpose for those who use them, right? I don't agree. I use them, but they're not going away. There are still horses on the street being used as transportation as well as mechanical work, right? Why, after 200 years of industrialization, are we still using these subverters? Because things don't happen in equal measure everywhere, and because there are other reasons why people make those choices.
Okay, so if they coexist then, I guess Bitcoin is a couple of things really. It's a tool, obviously, for sending value around hopefully transacting privately occasionally, but it's also an assurance against fiat.
Absolutely, it's an exit. It's an escape valve. It's a lifeboat. And the thing about lifeboats is that we hope you don't leak, if anything. It's nice to live in countries where the currency has problems, but it still works, right? And I don't believe in blowing a hole in your ship because you think it's not structurally sound just to see if you can test the lifeboats. I want them to be there, but I don't necessarily wish that everybody only uses those. So I see Bitcoin as a lifeboat, and in fact, a lot of power comes simply from the fact that it exists as a choice ready to be exercised. And that constrains the options of those who are trying to create a monopoly vision of the world where those choices are fixed, right? So if you're a dictator who's decided to go, to go fully committed to some kind of crazy policy that leads to hyperinflation, or if you know you can take your population hostage and close the borders and impose currency controls, then your power is maximum. But if you are constrained, because you know that as soon as you start doing that, people will start exiting, which will start drawing power out of your currency, then your choices are constrained, and so you may not even choose to create the conditions that would require a lifeboat. The fact that it simply exists prevents you from doing it, right? Mm-hmm. And that's power. If the next hyperinflation country doesn't go hyperinflation because long before it does, people start exiting in large enough numbers, or the leaders know they might, that changes the power dynamic between people and their government. And that's an important role.
Okay, so it's an insurance, but it's also, I guess it's a carrot for dictators for their, well, I
Dumbass.
think we're a long way from seeing that. But it is so cool. I'll give you a great example this week, Andreas. So I was out in Japan a week and a half ago to interview Mark Karpeles, and I had to hire a cameraman because I videoed the interview. And I haven't paid him yet because I tried to pay him from my bank in the UK to him in Japan, and it just wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work. I had the
It just won't
information.
work. Yeah. And,
Yeah, it
and
just won't work.
that's a use case that anybody who operates on an international market already understands.
Yeah, but like I've got somebody who had to pay me from Hong Kong. They sent me the Bitcoin. I think it confirmed within like it was just less than an hour. I've then sold it on an exchange, and I've transferred it to my bank account. I think from their Bitcoin to my bank account, it's been like 3 or 4 hours.
And that's if you count the time to convert from fiat. I do a lot of work with partners and suppliers and my staff who earn, spend, and use crypto directly and don't convert it to fiat. So that process is now down to about 10 minutes for international fulfillment and settlement of invoices. I get paid and I pay others. I'm not converting from fiat, I'm not converting to fiat. And as a result, by living most of the time in the crypto environment for my businesses, yeah, I'm down to 10 minutes, seamless, frictionless, international commerce, the style of which we haven't seen since the early 17th century.
Yeah.
You know, we're back to the type of international commerce that is enabled by, you know, gold Florence coins in the Venetian Renaissance. And it's beautiful because it means that it's a lot easier to operate as a truly multinational company. The revived flight will arrive in 1 minute. But truly operates across borders. Every time I try to do a wire transfer, something goes wrong. It usually takes weeks, unless it's one of the recurring payments that I have from one of my clients. We've already gone through those hurdles. If I try to do a new one for a new person, it's weeks. The longest has been 7 months to get a payment to a translator who's translating from my book into Russian. And, you know, that system's broken. And what most people don't realize is the kind of impact that has on international commerce.
So would you say we're just scratching the surface of the possibilities here? Because, I mean, you're doing it and I'm doing it, but there must be benefits out there to hundreds of companies, thousands, tens of thousands.
Absolutely. We are, you know, and I've used this metaphor before, but this is a bit like using FTP on the internet in 1991, 1952. You can see the benefits. You know, like, oh, all right, we can now move data across the world in minutes, something that was not possible before. But, you know, that's not the web or Netflix embedded in your TV, you know. That's going to happen. So we're barely scratching the surface. We're the early pioneers dealing with the very kludgy interfaces that just about barely work to do what we need them to do. And we can see within that a vision of what could happen and will happen as the technology is developed and matured and polished and reaches mass access. You know, that's really where we are. Still very early days.
But you found a flaw in my process in that I've done the conversion back to fiat rather than just staying in Bitcoin. So if significant numbers of companies around the world, you know, hundreds of thousands start moving value around in Bitcoin and not converting back to their local fiat currency, what actually happens then? Like, what happens when Bitcoin starts taking over?
Well, even if they do convert, the more volume of transactions we see, the more liquidity we see, the more people moving money regularly, that's going to have an immediate impact on volatility. The market, as it gets bigger, becomes harder and harder to budge. And when people are making long-term decisions and using this as part of their business and embedding it into their accounting systems, that changes the attitude towards this. It becomes less speculation and more medium of exchange. And at that point, I think we'll see a very rapid drop in volatility. This is one of those chicken and egg problems. You know, Bitcoin's volatile because it doesn't have enough adoption. It doesn't have enough adoption because it's volatile. And people say, well, how could it ever be adopted if it's volatile? And that's a bit like asking, how could it ever be big if it's small? Because volatility is a symptom of size. So when it's big, it won't have volatility. And it will no longer be small as a result. So it's a cyclical argument, you see, and part of that means that in order for it to reach adoption, there have to be motivations that overcome the initial difficulty of dealing with volatility. And those motivations exist in plenty of parts of the world where either the local currency is more volatile or other elements of friction in international commerce, particularly use cases and needs of censorability and mutability, cross-border transactions, refugees, hyperinflation, etc. All of those things create conditions where the need is greater than the temporary inconvenience of volatility and etc. So that's how adoption starts. And as that adoption grows, it drives down volatility, which opens up the door for more people to adopt who have less friction, who then drive volatility down until eventually the friction drops to zero.
What else happens there? So Bitcoin takes over. What are the other areas? What's the kind of chain effect? What happens to governments, markets? What happens to companies? What happens? Like, are there a whole? Is it like a chain effect across the world that changes everything?
I just wasted all those bullets.
I think it has very,
Oh, he got a
very
hologram.
significant
Okay, I see
and
you.
deep implications. And primarily because I see
I'll take this
Bitcoin
dude.
as the next
I should've got a
evolution of the
sniper.
internet. Meaning, I see this as part of the internet, an evolution of the internet. It's the internet plus the internet of money, the internet of value, adding another dimension, if you like, to the internet. So the internet started with data. Then it became communication. Then it became socialization. And now...
Oh, you're come on,
with
man.
crypto, I think it becomes...
You got lucky, dog.
the internet of commerce, the internet of value, the internet of money. And so, what implications will yet another evolution of the internet have on the world?
No, I should've
Enormous
waited.
implications,
I should have waited till his partner came and picked him up. That's the best way to do the joint. Let him crawl around. I should have threw a grenade. I wasn't thinking. Oh, you got so fucking lucky.
Much deeper than just money, and at the same time, just money is an enormous killer application that affects every aspect of society and is often underestimated.
I'm a beast by myself, yo.
The implications it has.
Let's play that again.
We're talking about a change in the way humanity organizes. The previous time we had a change, we've only had 3, right?
Awesome.
So hunter-gatherer, agricultural society, industrialized society. And now we're seeing the first 25 years of transitioning into an information society. And part of that is changing our form of money to conform with the rest of our information society. And what implications will it have? Bigger implications than the Industrial Revolution. It doesn't just change society, it changes humanity. And that's not because of Bitcoin. It's because of a deeper transition to an information civilization.
Yeah, it's funny because when I talk to my friends about it, and they're like, yeah, but, you know, what is Bitcoin, Pete? And I'm like, well, it used to be like it's money and it's digital gold, but now I've started, and I think this is the big influence has been Lightning Network for me. I now just see it as a financial infrastructure.
Yes.
Which you just plug yourself into.
And that's just the next wave, and then you start seeing it more broadly as a governance infrastructure, of which finance is one part, a very important part, but it starts putting tentacles in other aspects of governance, not just commerce. You know, it's a bit like trying to explain the internet, and again, I keep going back to this because that's been one of the forming experiences of my life, was growing up with not the internet, then the early internet, then everybody having it, right? So I watched that transition. And it informed my experience, because when I was trying to explain the internet to people in 1989 or 1990, the best explanation I could have is, well, it's about moving data around, kind of like the post office, only instantaneous and digital. Right? And that in itself was radical and earth-shattering. Right? The ability to move data around, but it didn't even begin to scratch the surface of what was going to happen next. So that's the same problem we have now, which is that if you really express the full vision of where you see this going, you immediately get classified as a coup.
Hey, I
Right?
get that all the
People
time talking
can't
about
handle
crypto.
that much
It
change
is that
in that
stupid,
short
yo.
period of time. And I'm quite comfortable being the coup. I've been there. My entire internet experience was me shouting from the rooftops as a 16 and 17-year-old, "This will change the world!" And the response I get, "Do your homework and clean your room." but this will change the world.
What? Everybody gonna be like, yeah, how many Bitcoins you got? You mean how many Satoshis you got? That's what's gonna be, yo. Yo,
I don't have to
yo.
clean my room anymore.
So then my friend Joe, they gonna be like, yo, man, I got Bitcoin. Yeah, you do, but you got Satoshis, dog. You don't own a full Bitcoin. I'm sorry, it would be an asshole.
About Bitcoin use cases.
Crazy part, y'all. I warned so many people. I said, when I first got into cryptocurrency some years ago, my friends was like, I just gotta see what it looked like. I'm like, nigga, let me see your bank account. It was like, nah, why should I show you my bank account? I said, so why should I show you my bank account? It was like, but crypto is not a bank. I was like, oh man, you just don't know. You just don't know. Okay, they all going the same rounds. I'm coming for y'all. Give me enough time, I ain't go here. So I told my friends that it's gonna be a time. And I'm letting y'all know now, yo, that when this shit hits fucking becomes a household name, you will be wondering how can you accumulate this drink?
It's pretty much a high interest.
How can you get it for free? What do you need to do to get it? Which is the most easiest thing ever, y'all.
Interest rates on Bitcoin and Ether.
I'm mine crypto.
Interest is earned in your
I'm
deposit
mine
currency. So if
Bitcoin.
it's